All right, diving right in today, folks. We're tackling this uh, Waqf Amendment Bill that's been stirring up quite a bit of discussion, especially in India. Now, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Waqf, properties set aside for religious or charitable work by Muslims. But this bill, it's aiming to change how all that's managed. And, well, let's just say it sparked some serious debate.
The interesting thing is this bill, it's not exactly new, it's actually back for another round in Parliament. See, the first time around the opposition, they raised some concerns, but those concerns, well, they seem to have been kind of brushed aside, which, to be honest, is only making things more heated.
Yeah, it definitely feels like things could get a bit, well, messy to say the least. So let's try to break this down. What exactly are the biggest issues, the things that have people so fired up about this bill?
Well, there are five main points that are causing the most friction. The first one, it's this whole idea of bringing non-Muslims into the management of Waqf. This is a huge deal for a lot of people. They say it goes against the very core of Waqf, which, is rooted in Islamic practices.
It does seem a bit like, well, asking someone to run a system that they might not really believe in or understand, doesn't it?
Right, exactly. And then there's the proposed 5-year waiting period. This is for converts to Islam before they're even allowed to donate property as Waqf. A lot of people see this as straight-up discrimination, like it's questioning the sincerity of new converts, which is, well, a pretty sensitive issue.
It almost feels like, I don't know, a test of faith or something, which doesn't sit right with many. Okay, so what else is causing all this commotion?
Another big one is getting rid of the walk by user rule. This rule has been around for ages. It basically means if a property has been used for religious or charitable purposes for generations, it's considered waqf, even if there's no fancy paperwork to prove it. Now, removing this rule, well, it could put a lot of mosques and community centers at risk, especially those that, might not have kept detailed records throughout history.
Oh, wow, yeah. That sounds like it could create total chaos, especially considering how long some of these places have been operating.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's the whole issue of who gets to decide what is Waqf property. Right now, there's a specialized survey commissioner who does that. But the bill, it wants to give that power to district collectors. The problem is a lot of folks are worried that district collectors, well, they might not have the specific knowledge you need to deal with religious trusts fairly.
It's kind of like, I don't know, putting a general doctor in charge of a really specialized surgery. They're both doctors, sure. But that specialist, they just have a much deeper understanding, right?
That's a great analogy. And finally, the bill, it proposes taking Muslim law experts off the Waqf tribunals. Now, this is a big concern because a lot of people are worried that without those experts, cases about Waqf, they just won't be handled fairly. They won't be handled with a full understanding of Islamic principles and laws.
It feels a bit like they're sidelining the very community this whole system was meant to serve in the first place. But, let's step back for a second. When we talk about Waqf, a lot of people, they automatically think mosques and graveyards, right?
Right.
But it's actually way bigger than that, isn't it?
You're absolutely spot on. That's a really common misconception. You see, Waqf funds, they support all kinds of things: schools, hospitals, universities, all sorts of welfare programs. This isn't just about Muslims, it's about the whole community.
So it's more like a whole network of social support, and one with a pretty long history too, right?
Exactly. We're talking centuries here. Even Ibn Battuta, that famous traveler from the 14th century, he wrote about Waqf being used to take care of kids in lodging houses. It was about making sure everyone had a chance. And now this bill, well, people are worried what it might do to this whole system that's been around for so long, a system built on caring for the community.
Yeah, it's like messing with a really delicate ecosystem. The consequences, they could be pretty huge. And there's something else I find interesting about all this. If the government is so keen on reforming religious trusts, why are they only focused on Waqf? What about other religious trusts, like, say, Hindu Devaswam boards? They seem to be getting a free pass.
That's a question a lot of people are asking, and it's a good one. It makes you wonder if this is really about reform or if there's something else going on, something a little more, I don't know, targeted. Professor G. Mohan Gopal, he's a legal scholar, and he's even called it a hostile singling out of Islam, which is, well, pretty strong language.
It is strong, but it's hard to disagree when you look at how differently these different religious trusts are being treated.
Yeah. You're right. It's a big shift from how things have always been done, both under British rule and after India's independence. There was always this understanding that you don't interfere with religious trusts, that they're best managed by the communities they serve. This bill, well, it's throwing that whole idea out the window.
So with elections coming up, What does all this mean? What are the potential fallout, the consequences of this bill?
Well, the stakes are incredibly high, that's for sure.
Yeah.
With elections like the one in Bihar just around the corner, political parties, they're finding themselves in a really tricky spot. Take the JDU, for example. They're led by Nitish Kumar, and they're trying to walk this tightrope. On one hand, if they support the bill, they risk alienating a lot of Muslim voters. On the other hand, if they oppose it, they could damage their alliance with the BJP. It's a real political dilemma.
It's a tough situation, no doubt about it. And it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
And then you have Muslim organizations, groups like the All India Muslim Personal Law Board. They're understandably pretty worried. They're saying this bill, it could give the government way too much power over Waqf assets, and that could really disrupt how these assets are managed and distributed for community welfare.
That's a serious concern, especially given just how much Waqf property there is across India.
Absolutely. And Dr. Fauzia Khan, she's a member of the Rajya Sabha. She's been very vocal about her opposition to the bill. She's calling it disastrous, and she's worried that it's not about reform at all. It's about taking control, seizing assets that belong to the Muslim community.
Wow, that's a strong statement. But what about the legal side of things? Especially with those sensitive cases that are already going on, like the Gyanvapi Mosque dispute. How could getting rid of that Waqf by user rule play into all of that?
That's a crucial point. Removing that rule, it could have massive legal consequences. Some legal experts, they're saying it could weaken the legal standing of certain mosques, maybe even open the door for land to be taken away from the Muslim community and transferred to someone else. It's a tangled web, and the consequences could be far-reaching.
It sounds like this bill could trigger a whole wave of legal battles. But it also brings up even bigger questions, doesn't it? Questions about Indian democracy itself, about minority rights, about how this all fits into the bigger picture.
It absolutely does. This
Yeah.
isn't just about managing property. This is about fundamental freedoms, about the role of the state in a diverse society like India. It's about making sure everyone has a voice, that everyone feels safe and respected.
It's a huge conversation, and this bill, it feels like it's right at the center of it all.
It is, and it's a conversation we desperately need to have.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive, haven't we? We've looked at the controversial parts of this bill, the history and scope of Waqf, the anxieties within the Muslim community, and the political maneuvering that's surrounding it all.
And in the next part, we're going to dig even deeper into those bigger questions about secularism, about minority rights, about what this bill could mean for the future of India. This whole Waqf bill, it really shines a light on this fundamental tension in India. It's about finding that balance between the state and religious communities. Like, where do you draw the line? When does the government go too far in trying to manage religious stuff?
All right, it's a tough one. It's like, on the one hand, you want things to be fair and transparent, but then on the other, you can't just stomp all over religious freedom, right?
Exactly. And this bill, it really raises the question, does giving the government all this extra control over Waqf actually make things better? Or is it setting a dangerous example, something that could affect other religious communities down the line? Imagine if they started doing this with Hindu temples or Christian institutions. That could really shake things up, It could change how religion works in India.
Yeah, it's like that saying, today it's them, tomorrow it could be us.
Spot on. This bill, it sparked this really important conversation about what secularism actually means in India. Is it really about the government just staying out of everything religious? Or is there a role for the state to play, making sure religious institutions are being run properly?
It's a debate that's been going on forever, it seems like. But this bill, it's definitely brought it back into the spotlight.
And it's not just an Indian thing either. All around the world, you see this same struggle, governments trying to figure out how to handle religious diversity, how to balance individual rights with what's good for the community, how to define what the state's role is when it comes to faith. It's complicated.
It's like this global puzzle everyone's trying to solve,
Yeah.
figuring out how to live together peacefully, even with all our differences.
That's it, exactly. And there's no magic solution that works everywhere. Each country, each community, they have to find their own way. But the most important thing is to talk about it, openly and honestly.
So what does this bill tell us about where India stands with secularism right now?
It's hard to say for sure, but it does seem like there's this growing tension, right, between the ideal of secularism and what's actually happening on the ground. Some people, they see this bill as a warning sign, like the government is getting too involved in religious affairs and maybe even stepping on minority rights in the process.
especially when you consider the history. India, it was founded on this idea of secularism, this promise that all religions would be treated equally.
Right. And sure, there have always been challenges to that, but this bill, it feels different. It feels like a more direct move by the state to control how a particular religious community does things.
It's definitely ringing some alarm bells, especially for those who see it as a threat to minority rights.
And it's crucial to remember that minority rights, they're the foundation of any real democracy. It's not just about protecting certain groups, it's about making sure everyone is treated equally, that justice is for everyone.
So where do we go from here? What can people do if they're worried about what this bill might mean?
Well, the first thing is just stay informed, Read about the bill, understand what people are saying for and against it. There's tons of information out there, online, in the news.
Like that old saying, knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
The more you understand, the better you can talk about it and fight for what you believe in.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to speak your mind. Talk to your representatives, write letters, have conversations with your friends and family.
Make your voice heard, right? That's what democracy is all about.
It's also super important to talk to people who see things differently than you do. Listen to what they have to say, try to understand where they're coming from.
It's about building bridges, not walls. We're not always going to agree, but we can at least try to have a conversation that's respectful and productive.
Right. And you never know, you might learn something new along the way.
This whole deep dive, it's really shown how complex this issue is. We've gone beyond just the details of the bill and gotten into this bigger conversation about secularism, minority rights, what it means to live in a diverse democracy like India.
And it's a conversation that needs to keep going. This bill, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle.
So, as we keep exploring all of this, it's important to remember that the future of India, it's being decided right now. The choices we make, the conversations we have, the actions we take, they're all going to determine what kind of society we end up with.
It's a responsibility we all share. We all have a part to play in making sure India lives up to its ideals, justice, equality, freedom for everyone.
It's a challenging time, for sure, but it's also an exciting time. We're in uncharted territory. And as we navigate all of this, let's try to stay hopeful, stay involved, and never stop working towards a better future. We've spent quite a while now really unpacking this whole Waqf bill, going from the specific parts that are causing so much debate to those bigger questions it brings up, about the relationship between religion and the government here in India.
And as we kind of wrap things up here, I think it's important to remember that these conversations, these tensions, they're not just happening in India. All over the world, you see societies grappling with the same things: how to deal with religious diversity, how to balance individual rights with what's good for the community, how to even define what role the state should have when it comes to faith. It's a global thing.
It's like we're all part of this giant experiment, figuring out how to actually live together peacefully and respectfully, even with all our differences.
Exactly. And while there's no one answer that fits everywhere, I think what we're seeing with this Waqf bill here in India, it's like a mini version of those bigger challenges. It forces us to really think about power, about identity, about what it means to belong.
And it's a good reminder that these aren't just, abstract ideas we're talking about. This stuff has real consequences for people's lives, their communities, their sense of security and well-being. It's serious.
Absolutely. And that's exactly why we need to be talking about it. We need to educate ourselves, listen to each other, and be part of shaping the kind of future we want.
So for our listeners out there, what are some of the big takeaways from our deep dive? What do you hope they'll walk away with?
Well, first and foremost, I hope they have a better understanding of just how complex this Waqf bill is and what it could mean for India. It's not a simple issue with an easy solution. There are strong arguments on both sides.
It's all about nuance, right?
Yeah.
Not just taking things at face value, but digging a little deeper, looking at the history, the legal stuff, the social and political forces that are all pushing and pulling.
Exactly. And beyond the specifics of the bill itself, I hope our listeners will feel, I don't know, maybe a little more empowered to have those bigger conversations, about religious freedom, about minority rights, about what secularism even means in a society that's always changing.
Because those conversations, they need to be happening, not just in India, but all over the world.
And they're conversations that require us to be, well, a little more understanding, a little more open-minded, willing to listen to people who see things differently. It's easy to stay in our own little bubbles, surrounded by people who agree with us. But that doesn't get us anywhere.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one thing you want to leave our listeners with?
The power of being informed and engaged. Don't just sit back and watch. Learn about the issues, speak your mind, be a part of shaping the world you want to live in.
Well said. It's been a fascinating journey unpacking this issue with you. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. And remember, knowledge is power. Don't take it for granted.